A cop notices a stain on a black girl's dress. As soon as she enters her house, the cop peers through the doorway, seeing something horrible, leading him to call backup. What lies behind the wall of the black girl's house? Will the cop be able to save her? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Jim wandered through the brightly lit aisles of Marshall's department store, his footsteps heavy and purposeless. The cheerful music playing overhead felt like a stark contrast to the heaviness in his heart. Just 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's miscarriage, and the pain still felt raw, like an open wound that refused to heal. He hadn't meant to end up in the children's section, but here he was, surrounded by tiny clothes and colorful toys. A small blue onesie caught his eye, decorated with playful elephants. Jim reached out, his fingers brushing against the soft fabric. He and Sarah had talked about elephants for the nursery, planning every detail with such hope and excitement. It would have been perfect, he whispered to himself, quickly pulling his hand back as if the fabric had burned him. The memory of Sarah's tears, of holding her hand in the hospital, came rushing back. Needing to escape the overwhelming sadness of the children's section, Jim turned away and walked aimlessly through the store. His police instincts, though dulled by grief, never truly switched off. Even on his day off, he found himself scanning his surroundings out of habit. That's when he noticed her. In the medicine aisle, a small figure stood alone, looking terribly out of place. The girl couldn't have been more than 15 years old, with tangled brown hair and clothes that had seen better days. She clutched something tightly in her small hands, her shoulders trembling slightly. Jim slowed his pace, careful not to startle her. From his angle, he could see tear tracks on her dirty cheeks, and the way she kept glancing nervously toward both ends of the aisle made his police instincts kick into high gear. Something wasn't right. Her sneakers were worn through at the toes, and her jacket was at least 2 sizes too small. The sight stirred something in Jim's chest, momentarily pushing aside his own grief. He watched as she shifted from foot to foot, clearly anxious about something. In her hands, Jim could now make out what looked like a bottle of medicine. His heart sank further. Was she sick? Where were her parents? The girl's eyes darted around again, and she wiped her nose with her sleeve. The fear in her expression was unmistakable, reminding Jim of the many domestic cases he'd handled over the years. That same look of uncertainty, of being caught between need and fear. Jim kept his distance but maintained his observation. Years of experience had taught him to assess situations carefully before jumping in. The girl's body language screamed of distress, the way she hunched her shoulders, how she seemed to try to make herself as small as possible. After a few moments of careful consideration, Jim decided to approach. He knew he needed to be careful, to appear as non-threatening as possible. He straightened his casual jacket, wishing he had his badge with him to help establish trust. Taking a deep breath, he walked slowly toward her, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. The girl noticed his approach, her eyes growing wide with fear. She clutched the medicine bottle tighter, taking a small step backward. "Hey there," Jim said softly, stopping at a respectful distance. "Are you okay?" The girl remained silent, her lower lip trembling as she stared up at him with frightened eyes. The vulnerability in her gaze tugged at something deep inside him, awakening his protective instincts. He knew in that moment that whatever was going on, he needed to help this child. "My name is Jim," he said softly, offering a kind smile. "I'm actually a police officer, though I'm not wearing my uniform today. I help people who need it. Would you tell me your name?" The girl's fingers tightened around the medicine bottle as she studied his face. Several long seconds passed before she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emily Carter." "It's nice to meet you, Emily," Jim replied, maintaining his gentle tone. As he spoke, his trained eye caught sight of something concerning, a small but distinct bloodstain on the hem of her faded blue dress. The stain looked recent, deepening his worry about her situation. "Emily," he said carefully, gesturing toward her dress. "I noticed there's a little blood on your dress. Did you hurt yourself?" Emily's eyes immediately welled up with tears. She glanced down at the stain, then back at Jim, but remained silent. Her knuckles went white as she gripped the medicine bottle even tighter, holding it against her chest like a shield. The way she avoided the question sent up red flags in Jim's mind, his years of experience telling him there was more to this story. "Can you tell me where you live, Emily?" he asked, changing his approach. "Maybe we can go there together and make sure everything's okay." Emily hesitated, shifting her weight from one worn sneaker to the other. After what seemed like an eternity, she whispered her address, her voice trembling slightly. "Would it be all right if I took you home?" Jim asked, still maintaining his crouched position. "We can go together, nice and slow." Emily gave a small nod, her eyes still wary but showing a glimmer of trust. She continued to hold the medicine bottle close as Jim slowly stood up, careful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten her. "Okay then," he said warmly. "Let's make sure you get home safely." The police cruiser moved steadily through the city streets, its quiet hum the only sound breaking the heavy silence inside. Emily sat in the back seat, her small fingers wrapped tightly around the medicine bottle as she stared out the window. Her reflection in the glass showed eyes that seemed too old for her young face. Jim glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his heart aching at her obvious distress. "Are you comfortable back there, Emily?" he asked gently. "I can turn up the heat if you're cold." She didn't respond, just continued watching the buildings pass by outside. Jim decided not to push her, letting the silence settle back between them. Years of police work had taught him that sometimes silence spoke volumes. As they drove deeper into the city, the neighborhoods began to change. Well-maintained storefronts gave way to boarded-up windows. Clean sidewalks transformed into cracked concrete dotted with weeds. Jim recognized this area all too well. It was one of the toughest beats in the city, a place where his fellow officers responded to calls almost every night. In the back seat, Emily's posture changed, her shoulders hunched forward as if trying to make herself smaller. The medicine bottle trembled slightly in her grip as familiar landmarks appeared outside her window. Each block they drove seemed to add more weight to her small frame. Jim felt his police instincts heightening as they turned onto Emily's street. The row of houses looked tired and forgotten, paint peeling from their facades, chain-link fences rusting, and yards overtaken by tall grass. Several houses had windows covered with plywood or sheets instead of curtains. When they pulled up in front of Emily's house, Jim had to force himself to keep his expression neutral. The small structure seemed to lean slightly to one side, its windows reflecting emptiness where glass panes should have been. Patches of bare wood showed through the faded blue paint, and the front steps appeared to be crumbling at the edges. "Is this home, Emily?" Jim asked softly, putting the car in park. Emily nodded almost imperceptibly, her knuckles white around the medicine bottle. "Would you show me the way in?" he asked, keeping his voice steady and calm despite the growing concern in his chest. She hesitated for a moment before reaching for the door handle with trembling fingers. Jim watched carefully as she stepped out onto the broken sidewalk, her small form seeming even tinier against the backdrop of the rundown house. Emily's small hand trembled as she knocked on the weathered door, the sound barely audible in the still afternoon air. Her knuckles barely grazed the peeling paint, making little more than a whisper against the wood. Jim stood behind her, his police training keeping him alert as his eyes methodically scanned the surroundings. The quiet neighborhood, with its overgrown lawns and drawn curtains, felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. The door flew open with sudden force, making Emily stumble backward into Jim's steady frame. A tall man with disheveled hair and 3 days' worth of stubble filled the doorframe, his stained t-shirt stretched tight across his chest. His bloodshot eyes fixed on Emily, his face twisting into an angry scowl that made the veins in his neck bulge. "Where the hell have you been?" Roy Carter's voice came out as a growl, his words slightly slurred. The smell of stale beer rolled off him in waves, mixing with the sour scent of unwashed clothes. "What took you so long to get back?" Emily's voice quivered as she tried to respond, her small shoulders hunching inward. I was just..." Roy's hand shot up, ready to strike, his fingers curled into a tight fist. "You stupid little..." In one fluid motion, Jim stepped forward and caught Roy's wrist in a firm grip, his fingers pressing into pressure points with practiced precision. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his badge and years of experience. "I'm Officer Jim with the police department." He maintained his hold on Roy's arm, keeping his tone professional but stern, his free hand resting near his utility belt. "I'd like to come in and have a look around if you don't mind." Roy's face cycled through several emotions: anger, fear, and finally a forced attempt at composure. He jerked his arm free from Jim's grasp and took an unsteady step back, nearly losing his balance. His jaw worked back and forth as he seemed to weigh his options, his yellowed teeth grinding audibly. "Fine," Roy muttered, his shoulders tense as he moved aside, bumping against the doorframe. "Come in if you have to." Jim guided Emily through the doorway first, keeping himself between her and Roy like a protective shield. As they entered the house, the state of neglect became immediately apparent. Wallpaper curled away from the walls in long strips, and empty bottles littered the floor, crunching beneath their feet. The sharp smell of alcohol hung heavy in the air, mixed with mustiness and decay, making Emily wrinkle her nose. "Nothing to see here, officer, just a typical family afternoon," Roy said, his words slightly slurred. The fake smile he wore didn't reach his eyes, which darted nervously around the room like a cornered animal's. Jim's gaze swept the room methodically, taking in every detail with practiced efficiency. The curtains were drawn, casting long shadows across the stained carpet. A television buzzed with static in the corner, its blue light flickering against the peeling wallpaper, creating an eerie dance of light and shadow. The musty smell of neglect permeated everything. That's when he saw her. A woman lay crumpled on the living room floor, her dark hair matted with blood. Her eyes fluttered weakly, and a soft moan escaped her lips. One arm was stretched out as if reaching for help, while the other lay limp at her side. Jim's stomach clenched at the sight, bile rising in his throat. This wasn't just a domestic dispute. This was attempted murder. "Don't move," Jim commanded, his voice sharp as he turned to Roy. "Put your hands where I can see them." His fingers flexed near his holster, ready to react if necessary. Roy's facade cracked, revealing the rage beneath. His fingers twitched at his sides, but he remained still under Jim's steady gaze. A muscle jumped in his jaw as he clenched his teeth. Jim reached for his radio, keeping his eyes locked on Roy. "This is Officer Carver. I need immediate backup and medical assistance at 1247 Oak Street. Possible domestic assault, victim with head trauma." His voice remained steady and professional, masking the anger building inside him. Emily broke away from Jim's side and rushed to her mother, dropping to her knees beside her. "Mommy," she whispered, her small hand reaching out to touch her mother's face. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the dust. Maria's eyes focused briefly on her daughter, a weak smile crossing her bloodied lips as she struggled to lift her hand toward Emily. Jim maintained his position between Roy and the rest of his family, his hand resting on his weapon. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife as they waited for the sound of approaching sirens. Every second felt like an eternity. "It's going to be okay," Jim assured Emily, though his eyes never left Roy. "Help is on the way." He silently prayed the ambulance would arrive quickly, knowing that every minute could make a difference for Maria. The sound of sirens filled the quiet neighborhood as 3 police cars and an ambulance pulled up to the house. Officers rushed in, quickly taking control of Roy, who struggled and cursed as they handcuffed him. Jim briefed his colleagues on the situation, pointing out Maria's injuries and the clear signs of violence throughout the house. "She fell," Roy spat, pulling against the officer's grip. "You can't prove anything." The paramedics hurried inside with their equipment, kneeling beside Maria to assess her condition. Emily stayed close to her mother, still clutching the small medicine bottle she'd been holding since the store. As the medical team worked, she carefully held out the bottle. "Here, Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I got this for your headaches." Maria's eyes welled with tears as she looked at her daughter. Despite her pain, she managed a weak smile, understanding now why Emily had risked going to the store alone. Jim watched the scene unfold, his heart heavy with the realization that this little girl had been trying to protect her mother all along. Multiple contusions to the head and face, one paramedic reported, carefully examining Maria. Possible concussion. We need to get her to County General right away. As they prepared Maria for transport, Roy continued his protests while being led to a patrol car. "This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong." The officers ignored his outburst, reading him his rights as they placed him in the back seat. Jim knelt beside Emily, who watched anxiously as the paramedics secured her mother onto a stretcher. "Your mom's going to get the best care possible," he assured her, his voice gentle. "Would you like to ride to the hospital with me? We can follow right behind the ambulance." Emily nodded, her small hand finding Jim's as they walked out to his car. The paramedics loaded Maria into the ambulance, and Jim helped Emily into the back seat of his patrol car. As they pulled away from the house, he could see Emily watching the ambulance through the window, her face full of worry but also relief, knowing that finally, someone was helping them. Minutes later, the hospital corridor buzzed with quiet activity as Jim sat beside Emily on one of the hard plastic chairs. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over everything, but Emily seemed calmer now, her small hand still gripping Jim's larger one. Her eyes remained fixed on the double doors where they had taken her mother. "Your mom's getting the best care possible," Jim said softly, noticing how Emily's shoulders tensed every time someone walked past. "The doctors here are very good at what they do." Emily nodded, her free hand fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "Will she be okay?" she asked in a small voice. "Yes, she will," Jim assured her, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "They're taking good care of her." Hours ticked by slowly. Jim got Emily a juice box from the vending machine and helped her get comfortable in the chair. Despite her exhaustion, she refused to close her eyes, determined to stay awake until she could see her mother. Finally, the double doors opened and Maria was wheeled out in a hospital bed. A white bandage wrapped around her head, but her eyes were clearer now, more alert. When she spotted Emily, her face lit up with relief. "Emily, sweetheart," Maria called out, her voice tired but filled with love. Emily jumped up from her chair and ran to her mother's side, careful not to bump the bed as she reached for her hand. "Mommy!" Tears streamed down her face as she held onto her mother's fingers. Jim stood back watching the reunion with a mixture of relief and sadness, knowing what they had endured. Maria stroked Emily's hair with her free hand, whispering words of comfort to her daughter. After a moment, Maria looked up at Jim, her eyes filled with worry. What's going to happen to my husband, Roy?" she asked hesitantly, her hand tightening protectively around Emily's. Jim stepped closer, his voice steady and reassuring. "Roy has a history of violence that we've uncovered. With the severity of today's assault and his previous offenses, he's looking at a lifetime sentence. He won't be able to hurt either of you again." Maria's shoulders sagged with relief and she pulled Emily closer. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks, but these were different. Tears of relief, of freedom. "Would you like me to drive you both home when you're ready?" Jim offered, watching as a nurse adjusted Maria's IV. "I can help make sure you're settled in safely." Both Maria and Emily nodded gratefully, their hands still clasped together, as if afraid to let go of each other now that they were finally safe. The drive back to Maria and Emily's house was quiet, filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Jim kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching Emily doze against her mother's shoulder in the back seat. Maria's bandaged head rested gently against the window, her eyes focused on the passing streetlights. When they arrived, Jim helped them inside the small house, which now felt different without Roy's threatening presence. The dim living room light revealed the mess from earlier, and Maria's hands trembled slightly as she took in the scene. "Officer Carver," Maria said softly, her voice catching. "I don't know how to thank you enough. If you hadn't been there today..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence as tears welled up in her eyes. Emily clung to her mother's side, her small fingers wrapped in the fabric of Maria's hospital gown. Jim smiled gently at them both, his heart heavy with their situation. As he turned to leave, Maria's composure crumbled completely. Her shoulders shook as she began to sob, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," she gasped between tears. It's just, I don't know what we're going to do now." Jim paused, turning back to face her with concern. Emily looked up at her mother, worry etched across her young face. "My health, I haven't been able to work properly for months," Maria explained, wiping her eyes. "Roy controlled everything. The money, the bills. I have nothing saved, and with these new medical bills—" Her voice broke again as she gestured helplessly around the sparse room. "How am I going to take care of Emily?" The desperation in her voice struck Jim deeply. He looked around the house, noting the empty cupboards visible through the kitchen doorway and the worn furniture that had clearly seen better days. "Mrs. Carter," Jim said gently, "I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I'll bring some supplies tomorrow. Food, necessities, whatever you need to get through the next month." He met her tearful gaze with determination. "We'll figure this out together, I promise." Maria's shoulders sagged with relief, though worry still lined her face. "You've already done so much." "Please," Jim insisted. "Let me help. It's the least I can do." Emily moved from her mother's side and wrapped her arms around Jim's waist in a tight hug. He patted her back gently, feeling the trust she placed in him. As he prepared to leave, Jim assured them once more that he would return the next day with supplies. He walked to his car with a heavy heart, but his mind was already forming plans to help the Carters find their footing in their new circumstances. Later that night, Jim sat in his favorite armchair as he shared the day's events with Sarah. The living room lamp cast a warm glow across their faces, making the moment feel intimate and safe, so different from the scene he'd witnessed earlier. "You should have seen her, Sarah," Jim said, his voice thick with emotion. "This little girl, barely old, trying to buy medicine for her injured mother. And when we got to their house—" He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. Sarah reached across from her spot on the couch and squeezed his hand. Her eyes were soft with understanding as she watched her husband struggle with the weight of what he'd witnessed. "I keep thinking about Emily," Jim continued. "How scared she must have been, yet so brave for her mother. When I saw her in that store—" He paused, swallowing hard. "I couldn't help but think about the child we lost, Sarah. About how we would have protected our baby from anything." Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but she nodded encouragingly. "Tell me more about them," she whispered. Jim described Maria's situation, her health problems, the financial struggles, and the fear in her eyes when she realized she had nothing to support Emily with. As he spoke, Sarah's expression grew more determined. "Jim," she said suddenly, sitting up straighter, "what if we helped them? Not just with emergency supplies, but regularly." Her voice grew animated as she continued. "We could provide groceries, maybe some clothes for Emily. We have the means, and it would mean so much to help a child who needs it." While Jim was a police officer, his wife Sarah ran a local departmental store, which could come in highly useful in this situation. A little act of kindness could literally save their lives. Jim looked at his wife with admiration, seeing the same compassion that had drawn him to her years ago. "You'd want to do that?" "Of course," Sarah replied firmly. "We need to be careful about it, though. We don't want Maria to feel like she's losing her independence or dignity. Maybe we could find ways to help that feel more like friendship than charity?" Jim nodded thoughtfully. "Maria seems like a proud woman. She was embarrassed just asking for help today." They spent the next hour discussing different ways they could support the Carters without making them uncomfortable. Sarah suggested starting small, bringing regular meals under the guise of neighborly concern. Jim added ideas about helping Maria find work once she recovered, knowing it would help her feel more in control of their situation. As they talked, both felt a growing sense of purpose. The pain of their own loss remained, but somehow, the chance to help Emily and her mother gave it new meaning. "Tomorrow," Sarah decided, "we'll start putting together some supplies. Nothing too obvious, just the basics they might need." Jim squeezed her hand gratefully, feeling blessed to have a partner who understood so completely. Together they headed to bed, their hearts lighter with the knowledge that they could make a difference in the lives of Emily and Maria Carter. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Jim and Sarah sat at their breakfast table. Steam rose from their coffee cups while they discussed their plans to help the Carters. Sarah stirred her coffee thoughtfully, her eyes bright with purpose. "You know," Sarah said softly, "when we lost our baby, I felt so empty. But thinking about helping Emily and her mother, it gives me a sense of meaning." Jim reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I know exactly what you mean, but we need to be careful about how we do this. Maria seems like someone who values her independence." Sarah nodded, buttering her toast. "That's why I think we should help anonymously at first. Maybe leave supplies at their doorstep or find other subtle ways to support them." "That's perfect," Jim agreed, checking his watch. "We don't want them to feel pitied or like they owe us anything." As Jim finished his coffee, Sarah's expression changed, showing that familiar look she got when an idea struck her. "Jim, I've been thinking, what if we could do more than just provide supplies?" "What do you mean?" "Well, the store has been growing and I've been meaning to hire a new manager," Sarah explained, her excitement building. "Maria needs steady income, and from what you've told me, she seems responsible and determined. I could offer her a position." Jim put down his coffee cup, considering the idea. "That would give her a chance to support herself and Emily on her own terms." "Exactly," Sarah said, warming to the concept. "It's not charity, it's an opportunity. She'd earn her way, have health benefits, and be able to provide for Emily properly. And you'd be able to keep an eye on them without being too obvious about it," Jim added, understanding his wife's thoughtful approach. Sarah smiled, already planning how she would structure the position. "I'll need to make it seem like a regular job opening, of course. Maybe put up some notices around town first, make it look completely legitimate." Jim stood up, gathering his things for work. He leaned down to kiss Sarah's cheek, proud of her compassionate heart and practical mind. "You're amazing, you know that?" Sarah squeezed his hand. "We both just want to help them get back on their feet." As Jim headed for the door, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her mind already working through the details. She would need to draft a job description, prepare proper paperwork, and ensure everything appeared completely professional and above board. The position would offer Maria not just income, but a chance to rebuild her dignity and independence. Sarah pulled out her notebook and began writing, determined to create an opportunity that would give Maria and Emily the fresh start they desperately needed. Later that day, Jim stood at Maria's front door, a brown paper bag filled with essentials clutched in his hands. The morning air was crisp, and he could hear birds chirping in the distance. After a moment's hesitation, he knocked gently. Maria opened the door, looking tired but more alert than the day before. Her bruises were starting to fade, though dark circles remained under her eyes. Emily peeked out from behind her mother's legs, offering Jim a shy smile. "Good morning," Jim said warmly. "I brought some supplies I thought might help." He held out the bag, trying to make the gesture seem casual. Maria's eyes widened slightly as she accepted the bag, peering inside at the groceries and household items. "Officer Carver, this is very kind, but—" "Please call me Jim," he interrupted softly. "And it's no trouble at all." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I also wanted to give you this, just to help with any expenses while you get back on your feet." Maria's face flushed and she immediately shook her head. "I can't accept that," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "The supplies are already too much. I appreciate your kindness, but I need to take care of my family on my own." Jim noticed how she straightened her shoulders despite the obvious strain in her expression. Emily clutched her mother's hand tighter, looking between the two adults with worried eyes. "I understand," Jim said gently, "but there's no shame in accepting help when you need it." "Maybe not," Maria replied, managing a small smile. "But I've always made my own way, even with Roy. I never asked for help. I can't start now. Emily needs to see that we can stand on our own." Jim nodded, respecting her decision even as concern gnawed at him. He could see the determination in her eyes mixed with fear and uncertainty about their future. The envelope felt heavy in his pocket as he tucked it away. "Thank you again for the supplies," Maria added softly. "But please, no more after this. We'll manage." After saying goodbye, Jim walked back to his car and immediately pulled out his phone to call Sarah. As he dialed, he watched Emily wave to him from the window, her small hand pressed against the glass. "Sarah," he said when she answered, "we need to move forward with your plan. Maria won't accept direct help, she's too proud for that. But she needs something sustainable, something that preserves her dignity." He listened as Sarah responded, nodding in agreement. They needed to find a way to help that would allow Maria to maintain her independence while ensuring she and Emily had what they needed to build a new life. Sarah sat at her desk, carefully choosing each word as she designed the job listing. The position of store manager needed to sound professional and legitimate, not like a charity offering. She printed the flyer on crisp paper, making sure it looked as official as possible. "What do you think?" she asked Jim, who stood nearby reading over her shoulder. The flyer detailed the job requirements, highlighting flexible hours and competitive pay that would be enough to support a small family. "It's perfect," Jim replied, nodding approvingly. "It looks like any other job posting. Maria won't suspect anything." Later that afternoon, Jim drove to Maria's neighborhood. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the quiet street. He parked his car a block away and walked to her house, the flyer tucked safely in his jacket pocket. Making sure no one was watching, he quickly placed it on her doorstep and walked away. A few hours later, Maria stepped onto her porch to bring in Emily's bicycle. The colorful flyer caught her eye immediately. Picking it up, she read it carefully under the dim porch light. Her heart began to race as she took in the details. Store manager position, good salary, flexible hours to accommodate family life. Inside the house, Emily was coloring at the kitchen table. Maria sat down beside her, still studying the flyer. The job seemed almost too perfect, exactly what she needed to get back on her feet. But doubt crept in, making her wonder if she was qualified enough. "What's that, Mommy?" Emily asked, peering at the paper in her mother's hands. "It's a job posting, sweetheart," Maria replied, running her fingers over the printed words. "For a manager position at the department store in town." Emily's eyes lit up. "Are you going to work there?" Maria looked at her daughter's hopeful expression and felt something stir inside her. This wasn't charity. This was an opportunity to work and earn her own way. She could provide for Emily through her own efforts, just as she'd always wanted to. Taking a deep breath, Maria made her decision. She would apply for the position. Even if she didn't get it, at least she would have tried. It felt different from accepting handouts. This was a chance to prove herself, to build something on her own terms. She carefully folded the flyer and placed it in her purse, already planning what she would wear to the interview. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope for their future. Not because someone was helping her, but because she had found a way to help herself. Maria stood outside the department store, smoothing down her best dress, a simple navy blue number she'd carefully ironed that morning. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted Emily's collar one last time. The little girl looked up at her mother with encouraging eyes. "You look pretty, Mommy," Emily whispered, squeezing her mother's hand. Taking a deep breath, Maria pushed open the glass doors. The store was bright and welcoming, with neat aisles and cheerful displays. Sarah Carver stood near the entrance, her warm smile immediately putting Maria at ease. "Welcome, Mrs. Carter," Sarah said, extending her hand. "And this must be Emily. It's lovely to meet you both." Emily half hid behind her mother but offered a shy smile. Sarah led them to her office, a cozy space with comfortable chairs and family photos on the desk. She gestured for Maria to sit down, while Emily settled into a chair in the corner with a coloring book Sarah had thoughtfully provided. "Please make yourself comfortable," Sarah said, her voice gentle. "Would you like some water?" Maria nodded gratefully, her throat feeling dry. As Sarah poured water from a pitcher, Maria noticed how the sunlight streaming through the window made the office feel warm and inviting. "So, Mrs. Carter," Sarah began, settling into her chair, "tell me about your experience in retail." Maria straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from Emily's presence. "I worked at Wilson's Market for 3 years during high school and college," she said. "I learned everything from inventory management to customer service." Sarah nodded encouragingly, making notes. "And what draws you to this position?" Maria's eyes flickered briefly to Emily before meeting Sarah's gaze. I want to build a stable life for my daughter, she said honestly. I've faced some challenges recently, but I'm determined to create something better for us. I'm a hard worker and I learn quickly. Sarah leaned forward, her expression understanding. Being a mother myself, I know how important it is to create security for our children, she said. This position requires someone dedicated and responsible, someone who can handle both people and paperwork with equal care. Maria nodded eagerly. I'm very detail-oriented and I truly enjoy helping customers. I believe in treating everyone with respect and kindness. Sarah smiled warmly. Well, Mrs. Carter, I think you would be an excellent fit for our team. The position offers health benefits, paid vacation, and a starting salary of $40,000 annually. We can also arrange flexible hours to accommodate Emily's school schedule. Maria's eyes widened, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Are you offering me the job? Yes, I am, Sarah confirmed. And please know that Emily is always welcome here. We have a small break room that could easily double as a homework space when needed. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she glanced at Emily, who was contentedly coloring. Thank you, Mrs. Carver. I don't know what to say. This means everything to us. The early morning sun filtered through the department store's windows as Maria and Emily stepped inside, both dressed neatly for the important day ahead. Sarah was already waiting for them, her welcoming smile putting them at ease immediately. Good morning, ready for your first day? Sarah asked warmly, leading them toward the employee area. Maria nodded, squeezing Emily's hand. Yes, thank you, I can't wait to get started. Sarah showed them to a cozy break room where Emily could set up her school books and coloring supplies. The little girl's eyes widened at the sight of the comfortable space, complete with a small table perfect for her height. This will be your special spot, Emily, Sarah explained, showing her a drawer stocked with fresh crayons and paper. You can do your homework or draw while your mom works. Emily's face lit up as she explored the area, carefully touching the new supplies with wonder. Maria watched her daughter's reaction, her heart swelling with gratitude. Sarah then led Maria through the store, explaining the daily operations. You'll oversee inventory management, staff schedules, and customer service, she explained, showing Maria the computer system. Don't worry if it seems overwhelming at first, we'll take it step by step. Throughout the morning, Maria absorbed everything eagerly, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. She couldn't help but glance occasionally at Emily, who was now contentedly drawing in the break room, looking more relaxed than she had in months. During Maria's lunch break, Sarah spent time with Emily, showing her around the children's department. The little girl, usually shy and reserved, began to open up as Sarah asked her opinion about different toys and books. What kind of stories do you like to read, Emily? Sarah asked, kneeling beside her near a bookshelf. I like stories about animals, Emily replied softly, her fingers trailing along the spines of colorful books. Sarah pulled out a book about a brave little rabbit. Would you like to read this one together? Emily nodded eagerly and they settled into a comfortable reading nook. From the counter where she was learning the inventory system, Maria watched the interaction with tears in her eyes, touched by Sarah's kindness toward her daughter. As the afternoon progressed, Maria grew more confident in her new role. She helped customers with a genuine smile, organized displays with care, and quickly grasped the computer system. Every so often, she'd hear Emily's quiet giggle from somewhere in the store, where Sarah had involved her in simple tasks like arranging stuffed animals or organizing rainbow-colored hair ribbons. When closing time approached, Maria found Emily sitting with Sarah, proudly showing her a drawing she'd made of the store. The sight of her daughter looking so content and her new boss being so genuinely kind made Maria's heart full. Thank you so much for everything today, Maria said to Sarah, her voice thick with emotion. You've made us feel so welcome. Sarah smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. You're both part of our store family now. Emily can come here anytime. We love having her around. The weeks following Maria's first day brought steady changes to both her and Emily's lives. Each morning, they arrived at the store just as the sun was warming the sidewalk, Emily clutching her backpack filled with books and drawing supplies. The little girl no longer showed any hesitation when entering the building, Instead, her face would light up as she spotted Sarah waiting for them. Maria's natural talent for organization soon became apparent as she masterfully handled inventory and staff schedules. Her quiet confidence grew with each successful day, and customers often commented on her helpful nature and warm smile. The other employees responded well to her leadership, appreciating her fair and considerate approach. "You're doing wonderfully with the holiday display," Sarah told her one morning, watching as Maria arranged a collection of seasonal items. "The sales have increased significantly since you took over." Maria blushed at the praise, straightening a row of decorative candles. "Thank you. I really enjoy doing this." Meanwhile, Emily had found her own comfortable routine. She spent mornings doing schoolwork in her special corner of the break room, surrounded by the drawings she'd created that now decorated the walls. In the afternoons, she would often help Sarah with simple tasks, beaming with pride when given small responsibilities like organizing the ribbon drawer or straightening the children's book display. "Would you like to help me pick out new toys for the children's section?" Sarah would ask, and Emily would nod enthusiastically, offering thoughtful suggestions about what other kids might enjoy. The steady income from the store allowed Maria to make meaningful changes in their lives. Their dinner table now featured fresh vegetables and fruits, replacing the cheap processed foods they'd relied on before. Emily's worn clothes were gradually replaced with new ones, and her face glowed with delight when she tried on her first brand-new winter coat. At home, Jim would often ask Sarah about Maria and Emily's progress, his face softening with relief at each positive report. "Emily showed me her math test today," Sarah told him one evening. "She got all A's, Jim. You should have seen how proud Maria was." Jim smiled, remembering the scared little girl he'd first met in the medicine aisle. "They've come so far," he said softly. The store became more than just a workplace for Maria and Emily. It transformed into a sanctuary where they felt safe and valued. Maria no longer jumped at sudden noises or apologized unnecessarily for asking questions. Emily's quiet whispers had evolved into cheerful conversations with Sarah about books and animals. As Maria counted the day's receipts one evening, she watched Emily helping Sarah organize a new shipment of stuffed animals. The sight of her daughter laughing freely, no longer carrying the weight of their previous life on her small shoulders, filled her heart with gratitude. For the first time in years, Maria felt truly secure, knowing she could provide for her daughter without fear or dependency. The years had been kind to Maria and Emily. What started as a chance for survival had blossomed into genuine prosperity, with Maria becoming an integral part of the department store's management team. At 42, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her once haunted eyes now bright with purpose. Her dark hair, touched with occasional strands of silver, was always neatly styled, matching her professional demeanor. Emily had grown into a thoughtful teenager who inherited her mother's resilience and determination. Her childhood drawings still decorated parts of the break room, though they'd been joined by academic awards and certificates. She spent afternoons after school at the store, doing homework or helping out just as she had as a child. The store remained her second home, and Sarah and Jim had become the loving aunt and uncle she'd never had. "Have you thought about which colleges you want to apply to?" Sarah asked one afternoon, watching Emily organize a display of school supplies. "I'm thinking about pre-med," Emily replied, her eyes shining with determination. "I want to help people, like you and Jim helped us." It was during a quiet Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Maria was reviewing inventory sheets behind the counter when she heard the bell above the door chime. Looking up, her blood ran cold. Roy Carter stood in the entrance, his presence as threatening as ever despite the years that had passed. He looked older, his face more lined, but his eyes held the same calculating gleam she remembered. He wore clean clothes and had trimmed his beard, but Maria could see through the facade to the danger beneath. Her hands began to shake as he approached, memories flooding back of those terrifying years. "Maria," he said, his voice deceptively soft, "we need to talk. Privately." She gripped the counter's edge, her knuckles white. "I have nothing to say to you," she managed to whisper, though her voice trembled. "Now don't be like that," Roy insisted, leaning closer. "I've changed. I just want to catch up, maybe hear about Emily." At the mention of their daughter's name, Maria felt sick. The mere thought of Roy anywhere near Emily made her want to scream. But before she could respond, Sarah appeared beside her, as if materializing from thin air. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah asked, her tone pleasant but firm. She positioned herself slightly in front of Maria, a subtle but clear gesture of protection. Roy's face tightened for a moment before smoothing into a practiced smile. "Just having a conversation with my wife." "Ex-wife," Sarah corrected calmly. "And she's busy working right now." Roy's jaw clenched, but he maintained his facade. Reaching forward, he slipped a folded piece of paper into Maria's hand. "We'll talk soon," he said, then turned and walked out, the bell chiming again as the door closed behind him. Maria stared at the note in her trembling hand, fear coursing through her veins. Sarah placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, providing silent support as they both watched Roy's retreating figure through the store window. Maria's hands shook as she stared at the crumpled note, her fingers turning white from gripping it too tightly. The bustling sounds of the department store seemed to fade away, leaving only the thundering of her heartbeat in her ears. Sarah stood beside her, her warm presence a stark contrast to the cold dread spreading through Maria's body. "Maria?" Sarah's gentle voice broke through her paralysis. "What did he give you?" Maria looked up at her friend, tears welling in her eyes. After all these years of building a new life, of feeling safe, Roy had found a way to shatter her peace with just a few words. She slowly extended her trembling hand, passing the note to Sarah. Sarah carefully unfolded the paper, her expression darkening as she read the threatening message. "Meet me tomorrow night, or she gets hurt." The words hung heavy in the air between them, their implications clear and terrifying. "Oh, Maria," Sarah whispered, placing a comforting hand on her friend's shoulder. "We need to tell Jim about this right away."
No.
Maria wrapped her arms around herself, shaking her head. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't know Roy like I do. If he finds out I told anyone..." She trailed off, memories of past retaliations flooding her mind. "Listen to me," Sarah said firmly, guiding Maria to a nearby chair in the break room. "You're not alone anymore. You have us, Jim, me, people who care about you and Emily. We won't let him hurt either of you." Tears rolled down Maria's cheeks as she struggled with the decision. But what if going to the police makes things worse? What if he... She couldn't finish the sentence, the thought of Emily being hurt too terrible to voice. Sarah knelt beside her, taking both of Maria's hands in hers. "Roy wants you to feel isolated and scared. That's how he controlled you before. But you're stronger now, and you have support. Jim needs to know about this threat." Maria closed her eyes, remembering all the times Jim and Sarah had been there for her and Emily over the years. They had never let her down, never asked for anything in return. The thought of facing Roy alone made her stomach churn. "You're right," she finally whispered, opening her eyes to meet Sarah's concerned gaze. "We should tell Jim. I need you there with me when we do." Sarah squeezed her hands reassuringly. "Of course I'll be there. We'll wait until Jim gets home tonight and we'll figure this out together. Roy won't hurt you or Emily. Not this time. Not ever again." Maria nodded slowly, drawing strength from Sarah's unwavering support. Though fear still coursed through her veins, she felt a small measure of relief in knowing she wouldn't have to face this threat alone. The evening air felt heavy with tension as Maria and Sarah sat in Jim's living room. Jim stood by the fireplace, his jaw clenched as he read Roy's threatening note for the third time. The paper crinkled softly in his hands as his fingers tightened around its edges. "You absolutely did the right thing by coming to me," Jim said, his voice firm but gentle. He placed the note on the coffee table and sat across from Maria, who was wringing her hands nervously in her lap. "I just keep thinking about Emily," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "If anything happened to her because of him..." Sarah moved closer to Maria on the couch, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Nothing will happen to Emily. We won't let it." Jim leaned forward, his expression determined. "I have an idea," he said, his police training kicking in. "We'll set up a meeting with Roy, but it won't be just you there, Maria. I'll have plainclothes officers stationed nearby, ready to move in if he tries anything. Maria's eyes widened with concern. But what if he sees them? What if he gets angry and… These are trained professionals, Jim assured her. They know how to remain invisible while keeping you safe. Roy won't know they're there unless he gives us reason to intervene. Sarah squeezed Maria's shoulder gently. And I'll keep Emily with me during the meeting. She'll be completely safe, I promise. We can arrange the meeting in a public place, Jim continued, mapping out the details. Somewhere with plenty of witnesses, but also enough space for our officers to maintain surveillance. You'll never be alone with him, Maria, not for a second. Maria took a deep breath, drawing strength from their support. Though fear still lingered in her eyes, she nodded slowly. Okay, she said quietly. I trust you, Jim. We're going to end this, Jim promised, his voice filled with conviction. You and Emily aren't alone anymore. Roy needs to understand that he can't control you through fear, not anymore. Sarah reached for Maria's hand, holding it firmly. We're your family now, Maria. We protect our family. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she looked between Jim and Sarah, feeling the solid foundation of support they offered. For the first time since seeing Roy at the store, she felt a small spark of hope beneath her fear. Jim stood up, his posture straight and determined. I'll make the arrangements tonight. We'll have everything in place by tomorrow. Roy won't know what hit him. The park's shadows stretched long across the grass as Maria stepped out of her car, her heart pounding against her ribs. The evening air felt unusually still, broken only by distant traffic sounds and the occasional rustle of leaves. She knew Jim and his team were positioned strategically around the area, but their presence remained invisible to her eyes. As she walked toward the meeting spot, Maria's fingers trembled slightly, and she tucked them into her jacket pockets. The dim streetlight cast an eerie glow, under which she could make out Roy's familiar silhouette. He stood with his hands in his pockets, that same intimidating posture she remembered all too well. Roy's face split into a knowing smirk as she approached. Well, look who decided to show up, he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. Finally ready to be reasonable about our daughter? Maria kept her distance, maintaining several feet between them. There's nothing reasonable about threatening a child's mother, Roy. Threatening? Roy's voice rose slightly. Is that what you call a father wanting to see his own daughter? You've poisoned her against me, haven't you? He took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. You've always been the problem, Maria. Always trying to control everything. Maria felt her throat tighten, but she stood her ground. You lost the right to be in Emily's life when you chose violence over being a father. Don't you dare lecture me about rights, Roy's voice boomed across the empty park as he advanced toward her. You think you can keep my daughter from me? You think… Before he could finish, multiple figures emerged from the shadows. Jim's voice cut through the darkness, clear and authoritative. That's far enough, Roy. Roy spun around, suddenly aware of the officers closing in from all directions. His face contorted with rage as he realized the trap, and he made a desperate move to run. But the officers were ready, quickly surrounding him and blocking his escape routes. You set me up, Roy snarled at Maria as two officers grabbed his arms, securing them behind his back. You manipulative… The only one manipulating anyone here is you, Roy, Jim interrupted, stepping into the light. He nodded to his officers as they began leading Roy away, reading him his rights. Maria watched as Roy was escorted to a waiting police car, her whole body trembling with relief. But despite his bad acts, Roy was let go with a restraining order to not come close to his ex-wife or daughter. The drive back to Jim's house was quiet, filled with a profound sense of relief that seemed to settle over Maria like a warm blanket. Streetlights flickered past the car windows as Jim navigated the familiar roads, occasionally glancing at Maria in his rearview mirror to ensure she was okay. As they pulled into the driveway, the front door burst open. Emily darted out into the evening air, her face etched with concern and love. "Mom!" she cried, rushing toward Maria as she stepped out of the car. Maria caught her daughter in her arms, holding her close. "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's going to be fine now," she whispered, stroking Emily's hair. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching the tender moment with misty eyes. Inside Jim's living room, they settled onto the comfortable couches. The soft lamplight created a cozy atmosphere that helped ease the remaining tension from the evening's events. Emily stayed close to her mother, their hands intertwined. "Roy won't be able to bother you anymore," Jim explained gently, leaning forward in his chair. "With his previous record and tonight's actions, he's looking at serious charges. The restraining order will be permanent this time." Maria's shoulders relaxed visibly at these words. "I can't believe it's really over," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "All these years of looking over my shoulder, of being afraid." Sarah reached across and squeezed Maria's free hand. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. You're both safe now." "I don't know how to thank you both," Maria said, looking between Jim and Sarah. "Everything you've done for us, the job, the support, and now this. You've given us our lives back." Jim shook his head modestly. "You did the hard part, Maria. You found the courage to stand up to him. We just helped provide the opportunity." "And we'll continue to be here for both of you," Sarah added warmly, smiling at Emily, who had finally begun to relax against her mother's shoulder. They sat together in the comfortable living room, the tension of the past few hours melting away into a peaceful quiet. The nightmare that had haunted Maria and Emily for so long had finally ended, replaced by the warmth and security of true friendship and support. The morning sun streamed through Jim and Sarah's kitchen windows as the three adults gathered around the table. Steam rose from their coffee cups, creating a gentle haze in the early light. Jim's expression was serious as he spread out several papers on the wooden surface. "I know Roy's out of jail now," Jim began, his voice steady and reassuring. "So I want to make sure we have every safeguard in place for you and Emily." He glanced at Maria, who nodded silently, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. Sarah reached over and placed a comforting hand on Maria's arm. "We want you both to feel completely secure," she added softly. Jim pulled out a brochure for a home security system. "First, I'd like to install this at your house. It's top of the line with cameras and motion sensors. I've already spoken to some colleagues and we'll have regular patrols checking your neighborhood." Maria studied the brochure, her expression thoughtful. "That would help me sleep better at night," she admitted. "There's something else we should consider," Jim continued carefully. "I know it might sound drastic, but have you thought about relocating? Even with Roy in custody, there's always a small chance." He let the sentence hang in the air. Maria's face tightened with concern. "Move?" But Emily's just starting to feel settled. She has friends at school now. And the store. She looked uncertainly at Sarah. "The job will always be there for you," Sarah assured her quickly. "We could even look into transferring you to one of our other locations if you decide to move." Jim leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "I know it's a big decision, and you don't have to make it right away. But sometimes a fresh start in a new place can make all the difference. We'd help you every step of the way." Maria sat quietly for a moment, processing the suggestion. "Emily's safety comes first," she said finally. "I'll think about it. Maybe look at some options?" "That's all we're asking," Jim replied, relief evident in his voice. "For now, let's focus on the immediate security measures. I can have the system installed by tomorrow." Maria nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you both," she said softly. "I never thought I'd have people in my life who cared this much about our safety." Sarah squeezed her hand. "You're family now, both of you." As they continued discussing the details of the security system and patrol schedules, Maria felt her anxiety slowly giving way to hope. The idea of moving still made her nervous, but knowing she had such strong support behind her made the prospect less daunting. She realized that for the first time in years, she could actually plan for a future without fear. The early morning light cast long shadows across Maria's front yard as Jim carefully explained the new security camera system's features. His steady voice helped calm her nerves as he demonstrated how to arm and disarm the alarm, showing her the small keypad mounted near the front door. "See this button here?" Jim pointed to a red emergency button. "Press it if you ever feel threatened and we'll be here within minutes." He glanced at Maria, making sure she understood. Maria nodded, her fingers hovering over the keypad. "And the cameras?" she asked softly. "They're already recording," Jim replied, gesturing to the discrete devices mounted at strategic points around the house. "The footage is stored securely, and we can access it if needed." Throughout the day, police cruisers made regular passes by the house. Jim had arranged the patrols to vary their timing, ensuring no predictable pattern that could be observed. He'd also positioned plainclothes officers in unmarked cars at key points in the neighborhood, their presence invisible but vigilant. Inside the house, Maria tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Emily's sake. She prepared breakfast as usual, packed Emily's lunch for school, and kept their regular routines. But she couldn't help noticing how Emily's eyes would dart nervously to the windows whenever a car passed by. "Mom?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper one morning. "What if Dad comes back?" Maria pulled her daughter close, stroking her hair. "Officer Jim has made sure we're safe now," she assured her. "See those cameras? And the alarm system? Nobody can hurt us anymore." Jim checked in daily, either stopping by personally or calling to ensure everything was running smoothly. He coordinated with the undercover officers, reviewing their reports and adjusting surveillance positions as needed. His dedication to their safety was unwavering. As days passed, Maria began to relax slightly. The presence of the security system and knowing help was just minutes away gave her a growing sense of security. She found herself sleeping better at night, though she still kept the emergency number by her bedside. The regular patrols became a comforting sight. Maria would occasionally catch glimpses of the undercover officers as they rotated positions, a woman walking her dog, a man reading a newspaper in his parked car, a couple jogging past the house. Their subtle presence reminded her that they weren't alone anymore. Jim made sure to vary his check-ins, sometimes stopping by the store where Maria worked, other times driving past their house during his shifts. He wanted to ensure that Roy, if he had any accomplices watching, wouldn't be able to predict their protective measures. Each evening, Maria would carefully set the alarm system, following Jim's instructions precisely. The small beeping sound as it armed became a reassuring ritual, signaling that they were safe for another night. Emily gradually stopped flinching at every passing car, though she still preferred to stay close to her mother when they were home. One day, the autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Emily walked home from school, her backpack heavy with textbooks. Something felt off. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as an uncomfortable sensation washed over her, the feeling of being watched. Her steps slowed as she cautiously glanced around the school grounds. That's when she saw it, a shadowy figure partially hidden behind a large oak tree at the edge of the playground. The way the person stood, slightly hunched with broad shoulders, reminded her instantly of her father. Her heart began to race. Emily clutched her backpack straps tighter, her knuckles turning white. The figure shifted slightly, and a ray of sunlight caught his profile. Though she couldn't make out clear features, the similarity to Roy was unmistakable. Pure fear gripped her chest. Without hesitation, Emily broke into a run. Her feet pounded against the sidewalk as she sprinted toward home, not daring to look back. The sound of blood rushing in her ears drowned out everything else. She didn't slow down until she reached her front door, fumbling with her key before bursting inside. "Mom!" she called out, her voice cracking with panic. "Mom!" Maria rushed from the kitchen, immediately noting her daughter's pale face and trembling hands. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Emily collapsed into her mother's arms, tears streaming down her face as she described what she'd seen. Her voice shook as she explained how the figure had reminded her of Roy, how he'd been watching her from the shadows. Maria's face tightened with concern as she listened, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm calling Jim right now," she said, reaching for her phone. Within minutes of her call, Jim's police cruiser pulled up outside their house. Jim sat with Emily at the kitchen table, his notebook open as she described every detail she could remember. The figure's height, build, the way he stood, where exactly she'd seen him. He nodded encouragingly as she spoke, jotting down notes and asking gentle questions to help her recall more details. "You did exactly the right thing by running home and telling your mom," Jim assured her, his voice firm but kind. "I'm going to make sure there are more officers around your school, especially during arrival and dismissal times." Maria sat close to Emily, keeping an arm around her shoulders as Jim explained the additional security measures he would implement. He would station plainclothes officers near the school grounds and increase patrol frequency in the surrounding blocks. "We take this very seriously," Jim said, looking directly at Emily. "I promise you, we won't let anything happen to you or your mom. You're safe." Though Emily's hands still trembled slightly, Jim's steady presence and immediate response helped calm her fears. She nodded, managing a small smile as he detailed how the officers would keep watch over her school. "From now on," Jim added, "I'll have an officer escort you home from school until we're certain there's no threat." He reached across the table and gave Emily's hand a reassuring pat. "You don't have to be scared anymore." The evening had settled quietly over Maria and Emily's home as they prepared for bed. Maria was folding laundry while Emily worked on her homework at the kitchen table, the peaceful domesticity a stark contrast to the day's earlier confrontation at the store. A sudden knock at the door made them both freeze. Maria approached cautiously, her heart racing as she remembered Roy's threatening words. Through the peephole, she saw only darkness. Relief flooded through her, and she started to turn away, assuming it was just neighborhood kids playing pranks. The sound of shattering glass from the back of the house shattered that illusion. Maria's maternal instincts kicked in instantly. "Emily, come here," she whispered urgently, grabbing her daughter's hand. She quickly led Emily to the hallway closet, her mind racing. "Sweetheart, I need you to stay here and be absolutely quiet. No matter what you hear. Don't come out until I or Officer Jim comes to get you, understand?" Maria's voice was barely audible as she helped Emily into the closet. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Mom, I'm scared," she whispered. "I know, baby, just stay quiet, everything will be okay." Maria closed the closet door just as heavy footsteps echoed through the house. "Emily!" Roy's voice boomed through the halls. "Where are you, princess? Daddy's here to take you home." Maria stepped into the living room, positioning herself between Roy and the hallway leading to Emily's hiding place. "Roy, please leave. You're breaking the law." "Where is she?" Roy demanded, his face contorted with rage. He moved through the room, overturning furniture in his search. "She's my daughter. You can't keep her from me." "She's not here," Maria lied, trying to keep her voice steady. "She's staying with friends tonight." Roy advanced toward her, his eyes wild. "You're lying, Emily!" he shouted again, moving toward the hallway. Maria blocked his path. "Roy, think about what you're doing. This isn't the way to show Emily you care about her." "Get out of my way," Roy growled, grabbing Maria's arm roughly. In the closet, Emily pressed her hands over her mouth to stifle a whimper as she heard her father's angry voice getting closer. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Jim led a team of officers into the house, their weapons drawn. "Freeze! Hands where we can see them, Roy!" Roy spun around, still gripping Maria's arm. His face twisted with hatred as he recognized Jim. The officers quickly surrounded him, and after a brief struggle, they managed to subdue and handcuff him. Maria rushed to the closet, throwing open the door. Emily launched herself into her mother's arms, sobbing. "Mom!" "It's okay, baby, it's over," Maria soothed, holding Emily tightly as they watched the officers lead Roy away. Jim approached them, his face filled with concern. "You're both safe now. He won't be able to hurt either of you again." The fluorescent lights of the police station cast a harsh glow as Jim led Maria and Emily through the busy corridors. Officers nodded respectfully as they passed, their faces showing sympathy for the mother and daughter who had endured so much. Jim guided them to a quiet interview room, ensuring they had comfortable chairs and water before beginning the formal process. "I want you both to know that Roy won't be able to hurt you anymore," Jim said, his voice steady and reassuring as he spread out the necessary paperwork. "The charges he's facing are severe, especially given his prior record." Maria sat with Emily pressed close to her side, the young girl's hand tightly gripping her mother's. Jim carefully explained each charge, his pen tapping the documents as he went through them. Breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, violation of the existing restraining order. These are serious offenses, Jim continued. With his history of domestic violence and the evidence we have from tonight, he's looking at a lengthy sentence. Emily listened quietly, her eyes fixed on the table. Maria squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling a wave of relief wash over her as Jim's words sank in. For the first time in years, she could imagine a future without looking over her shoulder. The restraining order we're filing today will be permanent, Jim explained, sliding the forms across the table. It will protect both you and Emily, even after he serves his sentence. He won't be allowed within 500 feet of either of you, your home, Emily's school, or your workplace. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she signed the papers, but her signature was firm and decisive. Each stroke of the pen felt like another brick in the wall of safety being built around her and Emily. "Officer Jim?" Emily's voice was small but steady. "He really can't come back this time?" Jim leaned forward, his expression gentle but serious. "No, Emily. He won't be able to come back. I promise you'll both be safe." The tension in Emily's shoulders eased slightly at his words. She had grown to trust Jim's promises over the years, and his presence made her feel protected in a way she had rarely experienced before. As they worked through the remaining documentation, Maria felt exhaustion settling into her bones, but beneath it was an unfamiliar lightness. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long was beginning to lift, replaced by cautious hope. "I'll keep you updated on every step of the legal process," Jim assured them, organizing the completed paperwork. "You won't have to face any of this alone. We'll make sure he stays behind bars where he belongs." Maria nodded, tears of relief gathering in her eyes. "Thank you, Jim. For everything." Emily looked up at her mother, then at Jim, her young face showing the first signs of peace since the terrifying events of the evening. The police station, despite its stark atmosphere, had become a sanctuary where their future was being reshaped into something brighter. The gentle spring breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the neighborhood as Maria and Emily settled into their evening routine. The past few weeks had brought a remarkable change to their lives, a peace they hadn't known for years. The security system Jim had installed blinked steadily, a quiet guardian that helped them sleep soundly at night. Emily sat at the kitchen table working on her homework with newfound concentration. Her latest math test, marked with a bright red A, hung proudly on the refrigerator. Maria watched her daughter with a warm smile, noticing how the constant tension in Emily's shoulders had finally eased. "Mom, can you check my essay?" Emily asked, her voice carrying a confidence that had been absent before. Maria's heart swelled with pride as she read through Emily's work. Her daughter's writing had improved significantly now that she could focus on school without fear clouding her thoughts. Later that evening, they arrived at Jim and Sarah's house, where the aroma of Sarah's cooking filled the air. Sarah greeted them with warm hugs, while Jim stood in the doorway, beaming at the sight of their relaxed expressions. Come in," Sarah ushered them inside. "Dinner's almost ready." The dining room table was set beautifully, with candles casting a warm glow over the gathering. As they settled into their seats, Jim raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice full of genuine warmth. "And to family," Sarah added, reaching over to squeeze Maria's hand. The conversation flowed easily as they shared the meal. Emily eagerly told them about her improved grades and her new friends at school. Maria spoke about her plans to take some evening classes, something she'd always dreamed of but never dared pursue before. "You know we're here to help with whatever you need," Sarah offered. "Emily can stay with us anytime you have classes." "That's right," Jim agreed. "We want to see you both thrive." Emily looked at Jim with admiration, seeing in him the protective father figure she'd never had. The warmth and security she felt in their presence showed clearly on her face as she smiled at him across the table. Maria felt tears of gratitude welling up in her eyes as she looked around at these people who had become more than friends. They were family. The future, which had once seemed so dark and threatening, now held possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. "We mean it, Maria," Jim said earnestly. "You and Emily will always have a place with us. Whatever you need, whenever you need it." Emily beamed at these words, and Maria noticed how her daughter's smile now reached her eyes, a sight that had become wonderfully common in recent weeks. One evening, Sarah's hands trembled as she held the positive pregnancy test, her heart racing with joy. She waited until evening, when Jim returned from his shift, barely able to contain her excitement. As he walked through the door, she practically bounced on her toes. "Jim," she called out, her voice quivering. I have something to tell you." Jim hung up his jacket, noticing the gleam in her eyes. "What is it, honey?" Sarah held out the test, and Jim's eyes widened as he realized what he was seeing. He pulled her into a tight embrace, tears welling up in his eyes. After their previous loss, this moment felt especially precious. "We're going to have a baby," Sarah whispered against his chest. As they held each other, both of their thoughts turned to Maria and Emily. Over the past months, the two families had grown incredibly close, sharing holidays, weekends, and everyday moments together. "We should tell Maria and Emily right away," Jim suggested, still holding Sarah close. "They're family now." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Let's have them over for dinner tomorrow. I'll make Emily's favorite lasagna." The next evening, Maria and Emily arrived at Jim and Sarah's house, curious about the special invitation. Emily carried a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked on the way, presenting them to Sarah with a bright smile. Throughout dinner, Jim and Sarah exchanged excited glances, barely containing their news. Finally, as Sarah brought out dessert, Jim cleared his throat. "We have something special to share with you both," he began, reaching for Sarah's hand. Sarah's face glowed as she announced, "We're going to have a baby." Emily's fork clattered against her plate as she jumped up from her chair. "Really? A real baby?" Maria's eyes filled with happy tears as she watched Emily's excitement. The young girl rushed to Sarah's side, wrapping her arms around her in a gentle hug. "Can I help take care of the baby?" Emily asked eagerly. "I could be like a big sister." Sarah hugged Emily back, touched by her enthusiasm. "We would love that, sweetheart. This baby is going to need lots of love and attention." "And you'll both be part of the baby's life," Jim added, smiling at Maria. "Every step of the way." Maria reached across the table to squeeze Sarah's hand. "We're so happy for you both. This baby is going to be so loved." Emily could barely sit still through dessert, peppering Jim and Sarah with questions about the baby. When would it arrive? Would it be a boy or a girl? Could she help decorate the nursery? The evening buzzed with joy and excitement, the two families drawing even closer through this shared happiness. As they prepared to leave, Emily hugged both Jim and Sarah tightly. "This is the best news ever," she declared, her face beaming with genuine delight. The autumn evening wrapped Jim and Sarah's home in a cozy warmth as they prepared for Maria and Emily's visit. Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, arranging a plate of Emily's favorite cookies, while Jim set the table with their best dishes. When Maria and Emily arrived, the house filled with the comfortable familiarity that had grown between them over the months. Emily immediately went to help Sarah in the kitchen, while Maria hung up their coats. During dinner, conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by Emily's excited questions about the baby and Sarah's gentle responses. Jim watched them all with quiet contentment, knowing the moment they'd planned would mean so much to both Maria and Emily. After the meal, Jim gently touched Maria's arm. "Would you mind joining me in the study for a moment?" In the warmly lit room, Jim gestured for Maria to take a seat in one of the comfortable armchairs. He sat across from her, his expression sincere. "Maria," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "I want you to know how much Sarah and I admire your strength, what you've done for Emily, the way you've protected her and built a new life. It's remarkable." Maria's eyes welled with tears as Jim continued. "We want you to know that you're not alone anymore. Sarah and I, we're here for both of you, not just today or tomorrow, but always." Meanwhile, in the living room, Sarah sat with Emily on the couch, holding her hand. "You know, Emily, having you around has brought so much joy to our lives," Sarah said softly. Emily leaned against Sarah's shoulder. "I feel safe here," she whispered. "Like I finally have a real family." "You do have a real family," Sarah assured her, squeezing her hand. "Your mom is amazing, and Jim and I will always be here for both of you." When they all gathered back together in the living room, Jim and Sarah stood before Maria and Emily. Jim's voice was steady as he spoke. "We wanted to tell you both something important," he said. "Sarah and I want you to know that you're part of our family now. Whatever happens, whatever you need, we'll be here. Always." Sarah nodded, adding, "This baby isn't going to change that. It's just going to make our family bigger." Emily rushed forward to hug them both while Maria sat quietly, tears streaming down her face. The love and security she'd always wanted for her daughter, and herself, had finally become real. 9 months passed by. Jim's hands trembled slightly as he helped her into the car, his police training forgotten in the excitement of impending fatherhood. Maria and Emily arrived moments later, climbing into the back seat with overnight bags packed for the long wait ahead. At the hospital, Jim paced the sterile corridors while Maria kept Sarah company, holding her hand through the contractions. Emily sat nearby, her eyes wide with wonder at the bustling activity around them. The hours ticked by slowly, marked by the steady rhythm of nurses checking in and doctors offering reassuring words. "Everything's going perfectly," one nurse said, patting Jim's shoulder as she passed. He managed a nervous smile, his usual confidence replaced by the overwhelming reality of becoming a father. Maria brought cups of water and small snacks, making sure everyone stayed comfortable during the wait. Emily occupied herself by drawing pictures for the baby, filling page after page with colorful welcome messages. When the time finally came, Jim disappeared behind the delivery room doors with Sarah. Maria and Emily settled into the waiting room, holding hands and sharing quiet conversations about what the baby might look like. Hours later, Jim burst through the doors, his face glowing with joy. "It's a girl," he announced, his voice cracking with emotion. "She's perfect, absolutely perfect." Maria hugged him tightly while Emily bounced with excitement. "Can we see her?" she asked eagerly. Jim led them to Sarah's room where she lay propped up in bed, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft pink blanket. Her tired face lit up when she saw them enter. "Come meet her," Sarah whispered, carefully adjusting the baby so they could see her face. Emily approached the bed slowly, her eyes fixed on the sleeping infant. "She's so tiny," she breathed, reaching out to touch the baby's hand with gentle fingers. "Would you like to hold her?" Sarah asked, smiling at Emily's obvious wonder. With Maria's help, Emily settled into a chair, and Sarah carefully placed the baby in her arms. Emily's face glowed with pride as she held the infant, instinctively rocking slightly. "Hello, little sister," she whispered, already feeling the special bond of family growing in her heart. Maria watched her daughter with tears in her eyes, touched by the beautiful moment unfolding before her. Jim stood beside Sarah's bed, his arm around his wife's shoulders, both of them beaming at the scene. The room filled with a peaceful quiet, broken only by the baby's soft coos and the gentle whispers of Emily talking to her new sister. The love that had brought them all together seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. In the months following the baby's arrival, Emily's outlook on life began to shift. Her experiences with the Carvers and witnessing their unwavering support sparked something deep within her. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table doing her homework, she looked up at Maria with determination in her eyes. "Mom, I want to be a doctor when I grow up," Emily announced, her voice steady and sure. "I want to help people like Jim and Sarah helped us." Maria paused from preparing dinner, touched by her daughter's words. She watched as Emily pulled out a notebook filled with medical terms she'd been researching at school. "I've been reading about different kinds of doctors," Emily continued, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Maybe I could help families who are hurting, like we were." When Jim and Sarah heard about Emily's aspirations during their next family dinner, their faces lit up with pride. Sarah immediately began thinking of ways to nurture Emily's interest. "There's a great science program at the library," Sarah suggested, bouncing her baby daughter on her knee. "We could go together every Saturday. They have guest speakers who work in medicine." Jim nodded enthusiastically. "And I know some doctors at the hospital who might let you shadow them when you're older," he added, making Emily beam with excitement. Sarah began taking Emily to educational events around town. They attended science fairs, medical presentations, and library programs designed to spark interest in healthcare careers. Emily absorbed everything eagerly, filling notebook after notebook with information and questions. Maria watched her daughter's transformation with pride swelling in her heart. The quiet, fearful girl who had once hidden in closets was now confidently raising her hand in science class and dreaming of medical school. During one library visit, she overheard Emily explaining human anatomy to younger children, her voice clear and passionate. "Your daughter has such a natural way of explaining things," the librarian told Maria. "She's been helping other students understand complex topics." At home, Emily created a study corner in her room, decorating it with medical charts and inspirational quotes. She spent hours reading and taking notes, her determination growing stronger each day. "I never thought we'd have this life," Maria confided in Sarah one afternoon, as they watched Emily help Jim's daughter stack blocks. Seeing her dream so big, knowing she actually has a chance to achieve it, it means everything. Sarah squeezed Maria's hand. "We'll all make sure she has every opportunity," she promised. That's what family does. Together, they began researching academic programs and scholarship opportunities, laying the groundwork for Emily's future. Each step forward filled Maria with gratitude for the unexpected family they'd found and the bright future ahead of her daughter. If you enjoyed the story of Maria, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.